So you can definitely do all of the work that we are talking that our tool does by hand. You can
Hmm.
do it by writing SQL. It's the most flexible language in terms of dealing with data sets and performing analysis. However, it does require certain skill. You need people to understand SQL, and SQL is a pretty tricky language. It seems very straightforward when you start, but you can get into traps very quickly.
Greetings, everyone, through here. Welcome to the Demo Hub. Welcome to the channel. We have a very fascinating guest and a fascinating product today to discuss, to see a demo, and to learn about in the data space, a very modern data tool we're going to be taking a look at. Our guest today is Satish Jayanthi. Satish, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me here. Yeah.
Yeah, really glad to have you on the Demo Hub to learn about you and the product you and your team are building. I think it's a very fascinating product. I'm a big fan and I'm very excited to learn about. For those who don't know you, Satish, can you talk a little bit about yourself and then we can dive into talking about the product?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Satish Jayanthi. I'm one of the co-founders of Coalesce. I've been in the data space for close to 20 years now. Have several roles in the data space, starting with all the way from DBA, database administration, to architect and directors and management positions. I'm a big fan of just the data space, and that's my bread and butter. That's what I've been doing. We started Coalesce to make a change in that space and influence the industry in a positive way.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And you've mentioned Qualys. What is Qualys for the audience who might not know what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in the data transformation space. Our goal is to automate the data transformation as much as we can. We think that is one of the biggest bottlenecks today in the data space, where it causes a lot of pain for IT and business who are looking to leverage their data to make decisions. You have on one side, you have the data ingestion piece that has been mostly automated. Like you have tools like Fivetran and other tools. Set it and forget, right? You just turn on the connections, you set up the connections, you turn on the schedule, and you're good to go. And on the platform side, you have Snowflake, which has done most of the automation as well. You don't need an army of DBAs. That's what I used to do in the past, where I was turning every knob and button to tune the database, make sure it runs and that it doesn't crash and all of that. Those days are gone. Snowflake is just automated pretty much the platform from that standpoint. And you also have a lot of end user BI tools such as Tableau, Click, and whatnot. So that's pretty much covered. Now, what you're missing is the transformation space, the transformation piece that's right in the middle. You get your raw data and you got to curate it, you got to prepare it, you got to change it and make it available to the end user. That piece of work is, we call it these days, the transformations. And that's where we are. That's where we want to make a change. That's what Coalesce is. We do that automation in that space.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that background. And I think that's a space I'm truly familiar with. And there seem to be a lot of players in that space. I'm guessing like the DBTs of the world, is that kind of where you're playing just to set the orientation for folks that are looking at this for the first time?
Yeah. So the space is pretty large. First thing, there's different types of roles, analytic needs, and so it's pretty large space. Traditionally speaking, we had these ETL tools. They are
Hmm.
pretty much GUI based tools, widget based tools that you can ingest data, you can transform the data, you can do loading and all of that. But since the whole space has become so big that the ingestion got separated, then we're talking about purely transformation. In the modern stack, if you look at, there's DBTs comes to
Hmm.
mind. A lot of people are familiar with that tool. They have their own approach where, hey, it's a code as code approach where somebody installing DBT and then start writing code to build the pipelines. One thing that they do, I guess, the modern tools emphasize on is the software engineering practices. You bring the software engineering practices to data projects. That has been a biggest trend because you want to be able to do that to manage all your projects and changes and releases and all of that. So yes, we are one of those modern tools with a different take on it, but the space is the same. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I think I know what your answer here would be. But for the folks that are coming on these modern tools and they're asking, a lot of these modern tools allow me to write SQL or Python now and Java. Why doesn't my team just write SQL and be done with? Why do we need a tool to do that transformation?
Yeah, so you can definitely do all of the work that we are talking that our tool does by hand. You can
Hmm.
do it by writing SQL. It's the most flexible language in terms of dealing with data sets and performing analysis. However, it does require certain skill. You need people to understand SQL, and SQL is a pretty tricky language. It seems very straightforward when you start, but you can get into traps very quickly. Those who have worked with SQL, they say that. They know that. The other thing is, at scale, can you do it? Now, as an organization, if I'm hiring these people and you're writing SQL scripts and writing a lot of scripts and big, gigantic, multi-page scripts, so at some point you will run into something like you have these hundreds or thousands of these scripts and you're still growing. And how are you going to manage all of that? How are you going to
Hmm.
manage in terms of changes to what you've built? Somebody's going to say, hey, I like the analysis that you put 6 months ago, but now I need you to go and update by adding certain number of columns to this. So where are you managing all these scripts? How do you determine what the impact is going to be by for the change that you're about to make? So the problem is what we're seeing is as the projects get bigger and bigger, either you have to grow your team size, you have to add more members. It also becomes very expensive to manage all this manually written code without some kind of tool that automates and provides some support in terms of making changes, managing versions. There's a lot of work outside
Hmm.
peripheral work that needs to be done, even if you after writing all these scripts. So by having all of that in one place and enabling the teams to manage those pipelines properly has a lot of value for organizations.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's always one of those things where they say you can go fast now and slow later, or you
Right.
can take the time to put that foundation, which might seem slow, and the investments to get that infrastructure, that data ops in place, which might be slow upfront, but long term, it allows for change management, it allows for governance and observability and a whole lot of things in place. So it does sound like that's a really good thing going on there. Can you talk a little bit, go maybe one step deeper to talk about how you've solved that problem with the solution you have, the product you have?
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of a history first we need to understand, so set the context for this, right? If you look at traditionally, we had ETL tools that I mentioned earlier. These
Hmm.
ETL tools, prior to those, people were writing code. People were
Correct.
writing SQL code, and they wrote code and it was taking too long. And they said, hey, we need a GUI tool. We need a GUI to get some efficiency because code is always flexible. We all know that. You can build, you can do anything that the platform supports. However, it takes long, and therefore the ETL tools were invented. ETL tools were a graphical way of understanding what happens in what order, and you can look at them and build pretty efficiently and all of that. But at a certain point, the ETL tools, the problems that were exposed to the ETL tools were they were built mostly as widget-based tools. So there's these
Hmm.
components that were given to you, and then you are pretty much you have to use them. And if you hit a corner case, there was not much flexibility for you to customize or modify or do anything like that. So that's where, and also they were very hard to integrate with CI/CD pipelines, do any software management practices on those. It was pretty difficult to do with those kind of tools. So then came everything as code tools. In one example, we have DBT, which is very flexible in terms of writing code, but does the organization have enough number of people who can write code all the time and can also deliver large projects on time, especially how do you manage changes and all of that. So everything as code is also, while it has its benefit of giving you the flexibility and following software engineering practices and all of that, but it also takes away the efficiency. Like if you are dealing with, again, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of scripts, it becomes very hard to manage that. So what we are saying is, hey, there's benefits in both sides here. You have the GUI side where you get the efficiency, and then there is the code side, we get the flexibility. How about we have the real world is a platform that would support both, the best of both worlds. You
Hmm.
have the GUI for the right people, but also at the same time, we give you complete flexibility for a senior architect or a senior engineer who can just go and code these patterns in the tool. So by bringing these senior engineers, senior architects who can set the standards, who can set the guardrails, but also allowing other junior engineers, upcoming engineers, even power business users to be able to get on the same platform and build the pipelines just by right clicking and using the GUI. That's the goal here. So that way you're making everybody efficient and also following the governance because everything is one platform.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I'm very curious to see because, to your point, and I did come from a background of data integration, and I think there was a paradigm, and I've seen that paradigm shift, like you said, where it was let's make everything GUI driven, drag and drop, pre-configured components to transform data. This way, you just drag that and off you go. And a lot of tools were going down that paradigm, and then again, like you said, switching over to more of everything as code, right? With Python really coming into play and Ginger and a lot of that innovation, but that sweet spot of being in the middle there, where you give enough flexibility, but still the guardrails. I think that's really piquing my interest to dive in and see how is that happening. And maybe this might be a good point to jump into a demo to see what Qualys looks like and how you are empowering teams to do that transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just to add one other point to what we were talking earlier is if you take a typical team in any organization, you have usually one or two architects and a couple of senior engineers and a few more like junior engineers. So the tool like Coalesce is more aligned to that kind of team composition because you can't have all experts on the team because it's expensive.
Correct.
For organizations. But at the same time, you need somebody to set those standards, set those to the ability to create those patterns, and then have other people also be productive. So that's why Coalesce is aligned with those real world situations. Let's go to the demo here. And
yeah, and while you're pulling that out, I'll just add a comment there too. It could also allow for reusability because if someone has done this amazing transformation, this call it a widget,
yep,
it becomes a pattern and other folks can reuse it across the enterprise and maintain standard and shared effort. Okay,
yep.
yeah, if you want to just go ahead and share your screen and then I'll bring it up and we can see that.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, Coalesce is a software as a service product. You just need a browser and a login, and once you log in, this is what you'll see at the top. There is the build tab, and then there is the deploy tab. So build is essentially where you're going to spend most of your time as a data engineer building what we call the graph. It's also called DAG, or in some places called SQL pipeline, but essentially it's the same idea, or running these SQL statements in a certain order with some dependencies. One of the requirements here that is the data should already be in Snowflake. We don't do any ingestion of data. So, but if the data is in, let's say, S3 bucket or somewhere that is an external stage for Snowflake, we can obviously do that. Because whatever Snowflake supports, we can make that happen from Coalesce. So what I'm going to do here is I have some nodes here in this graph. These nodes with different colors basically indicate that there are different types of nodes. And each node, for example, there is a red color node here that indicates a source table. As you can see, there's a source node. And then there's this green color, which is a stage node. So if you look at under stage, you'll see that is the stage node. The idea here is each node type is a certain pattern that you have encapsulated. So the pattern in this case could be it's a staging node, or it could be a dimension node, it could be a fact node. If you're doing data vault, it could be a hub, it could be a satellite. So whatever that pattern is, if none of those patterns meet your need, you can come up with your own pattern or come up with your own node that fits the pattern.
Just to double click on that. So what we're seeing here on the screen is a graph. A node, if we were to define what a node is, just an atomic unit of work. Is that what the definition of a node is?
Yeah, you can think of it that way. And basically behind the scenes, what it has is it has certain configuration options. So for example, if I click on any one of these, you can see on the right-hand side, there is this configuration that's available. So this configuration is available for a stage type of node. So one of the examples here in the configurations, you can see there is a truncate before option, which is always turned on for a stage type of node, which means when I run this node, I always first truncate the data and then reload it. So that's just how the option is built out for this particular. You can have also multi-source, which means unioning data from multiple sources into this table. So these configurations are specific to a particular type of node. So in this case, it's a stage node. The other thing that a node consists of is there's these two buttons that you see here. There is the create button, and then there's a run button. The create button is basically what generates the DDL for creating this object on Snowflake. When I hit that create button, it will go ahead and create that table on Snowflake. And the run button is basically runs the logic, whatever that logic that you say that you can add transformations like this, but based on those, it will generate the SQL to populate that table. So again, the three things are configuration, create, which is the create script that gets generated, and the run, which is the run script, the insert or the merge or whatever you want to run. So let me show you an example actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a different nodes here that I have in my Snowflake database. So I have this access to these database and schemas. So I can select these tables that are in Snowflake to add these, or I can also sample the data to see what they look like, the data. So I'm going to go ahead and say add. So now I have added these nodes to my graph. So this is basically, these nodes become my starting point for transformations. So if I look at customer, for example, I can see the columns, I can see the data types. I can also fetch the data just to see how the data looks like. In this case, you're looking at the customer key, customer name, address, and so on. Now, if I want to create, for example, let's say I want to create a customer dimension that I want to share with my business. Well, all I need to do is right-click and add node. And I see all these nodes that I have in my repository. Now, this is not a complete list, but this is what I have in my repository. You can see, for example, there's a data profiling node, there's a duplicator node, there's a date node, again, hub, satellite, something related to data vault, CDC, there's like dimension, facts, stage. So all these node types that are in my repository, but if, again, as I said, each node type is a pattern, but if you see or don't see something that meets your need, you can easily build your own node type. And that is the flexibility. That is the powerful aspect. You need to know some coding there, of course, but that is how you can say, hey, I am the senior engineer. I will build that pattern and I will make it available for other people so they can just right click and start building this stuff.
Okay. And what language do you need for building a node?
It's Ginger.
Okay, you're building that with Ginger. Okay.
Yeah, Ginger and SQL. Yeah. In this case, if I do stage and I just added a new node here, stage customer based on the customer node. And then if I double click on that, so this is what it did. It just created the same columns from that customer table. And I can see the options, the same options that are available on stage. So at this point, if I go ahead and create this table, it's generating the SQL that's necessary to create the table. So this is what it ran on Snowflake. And right now we created a table called stage customer, empty table, same data type, same columns. If I fetch data, there's not going to be anything in it because I did not hit run yet. When I hit run, it's going to generate the SQL to read the data from customer and write into this table. So that's what it did just now. And if you look at the SQL behind the scenes, you can see it ran a few SQL statements. The first one it did was truncate because this is on. This option was on, it truncated. And then it did an insert. And you can see that insert into stage customer, select from customer. So it auto-generated that basically for us, and it loaded that data. Now, if I want to change this data, if I want to transform this data, that's why we are here. This is a transformation tool. So you see this column name, for example, I want to change that to uppercase. Just a simple example, but just to demonstrate the idea, I can do something like that. And you see it's added that upper function, and this is Snowflake function. So anything that's valid in Snowflake, you can just put it in here as a transform. Anything that's valid in SQL, of course, and you just change that to uppercase. And if I want to do that on multiple columns, I can easily do that on multiple columns by adding bulkhead. I know we are zoomed in, that's why you can't see all the columns at once.
Yeah.
But you get the idea here, which is basically I'm saying, hey, apply this on all the columns at once, the same rule, and now run it. All the columns are now updated with that rule. I can also modify these column names. I can change the table name, or I can duplicate. I can add new columns. I can duplicate a column. So let's say if we want to add a customer label, such as gold or silver customers based on their account balance, I can do, when customer account balance is greater than $5,000, then I'm going to call this customer the gold customer, else a silver customer. Let's say that is the rule. And I just added that rule. I can also use this right-hand side area to type in a larger rule. But basically, I'm changing the data type here, create the table, and run it. And I can see my new column that we just added with the rule. You can see that is added. So basically what you do is if you take a complex logic that's available, the idea is to break that down into multiple steps, into a series of stages. You can join tables, you can do like row window functions, you can do whatever you need to do, but eventually you prepare the data. And then once you're ready, you can say something like, hey, now I'm ready to build my dimension node so I can share the data. Same thing, right click, like that endpoint, what you want to create. So in this case, I created a dimension. It gets its own prefix naming standard. It has a surrogate key. It has some system columns added for you. And on the right-hand side, the configuration options are different. Because for stage, we saw a truncate option.
Correct.
For dimensions, because these are persistent tables.
Yeah, you probably don't want to truncate your dimension all the time.
You don't want to truncate that. So that's the default option. Now, for some reason, you say, I want to truncate it. You can just go and modify behind the scenes to make this node behave in that manner. All these options are, think of it as Legos that you can put together and build whatever you want. So in this case, I have this business key that I can select, so I can tell how to append the data. But optionally, I can also say things like, hey, if the data changes on the source, I don't want to update the data. Instead, I want to create new versions of the records. So essentially, type 2 dimension, exactly. That kind of logic, while it's not rocket science, but it's non-trivial. You got to write a lot of code to make that happen for each table. And I'll show you in a minute what that code looks like. So I've already done everything. I've created surrogate keys. I've created the system columns. I've created the logic to change the track changes to these columns. So everything is there, and I loaded the table already with all the proper dates. And now if you look at what the SQL looks like that was run behind the scenes, it's a merge statement that you have to write, somebody has to write this on Snowflake by hand. Because this is a pattern, we were able to do it with a template behind the scenes with a node type, while giving the users the UI to choose things and run it.
Wow, this is really cool. A lot to unpack here. On this screen, I think I see a couple of things. Maybe you can help enlighten me on. There is testing there as well. Is that for specific test cases, or where does that come into play?
Yeah, so you can add node level tests, or you can add column level tests. And at a node level, you can just go and put a SQL statement that whatever SQL that you want to write. And as long as it returns some exception records, then that's a failure. And then you can say whether to continue the pipeline or stop the pipeline. So you have this option at the node level. And at the column level, we have a couple of tests right now. We're adding more as we speak, but these tests would let you say, hey, check it, make sure it's not null. Also, it should be unique. This should be unique, and this shouldn't be null, and blah, blah, blah. So it's writing all those tests for you behind the scenes as you're clicking those.
Oh, okay. And because when I think about some of the other options, is especially for not just testing, but thinking about data quality suites with like great expectations, is that something you integrate with, or are going to build a lot of that functionality as part of the testing suite you have going on here?
Yeah, we are going to be integrating with a lot of external tools. That is on our roadmap. Currently, we don't integrate with that data quality tool that great expectation that you're talking about. But we have plans to do that because people may have other tools that they may want to work in sync with the other tools. However, we are also having other enhancements that we're adding to the testing, such as template tests and other things. Yeah.
Yep. That's awesome. And then, Satish, one thing I've heard you talk a lot about is the concept of this column-aware architecture, which is, I think, is a foundational piece to Coalesce. You want to talk a little bit about that for an audience and why that's relevant to know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we strongly believe that for an organization, for bigger organizations, or even for small organizations, if you have a decent sized data warehouse, you need to understand how these columns are connected to each other. So for example, a business is using a metric. What is a metric made out of? It is made out of columns. And those columns could be coming from different places. And those columns could have been like derived columns that from transformations, and then they are coming from other sources. And if you don't have a way to really quickly understand that, it's going to be very difficult to modify things. Maybe while building, you're going to be building it with writing code, But if you say 6 months down the road, I got to modify certain things, I need to be able to understand that, how those columns are related, where these metrics are coming from a documentation, from a governance standpoint, from a maintenance standpoint. It becomes very important. So what we have done with Coalesce is we have built the tool with that column awareness as the basis. So everything that we do in the tool is based on that column awareness. So whether you're going here and picking those business columns, like the business key columns, so we know that you're picking these columns, and this column is tagged as business key. These columns are tagged as change tracking. All of this is possible because we store the metadata at that, and we leverage it everywhere. Now, as a result, you'll get some byproducts, such as, for example, I'll show you an example here. Column lineage is out of the box. So for instance, let's say I have this dimension that I built, and I want to create view here for this on this dimension. And I'm going to share this data with finance. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to share only these columns. Now, I can also create a secure view on share with data share and all of that. But the idea is you have this foundational data that you're sharing with multiple business units. In this case, I'll share with marketing. There we share everything. So with finance, we only share certain columns. So let's say this is the situation. So this is your graph. You built this, and in the real world, you can imagine this is going to be 30 nodes, 40 nodes, 50 nodes, depending on the complexity. A few months go by, you put this in production, everybody's happy, and finance is saying, hey, I'm getting some new data. I need to see that in my view. Now, if you have manually written all of this, you will have to look at the code. You will have to alter the tables if there are any temporary tables. You will have to modify it, make sure you're running with the right version. This is a lot of work, depending on what change you're doing. It's not an easy thing. It's not rocket science, but it's time consuming. And if you have to do that on multiple tables, on multiple places, it just multiplies, and then you are spending a lot of time. And also, depending on who is doing, it could be error and it could be different output.
Yeah, the dreaded impact analysis, right? When the executive wants a new metric on the dashboard and now people are scrambling. How do we add sales total to this report? Now we got to change this view. What other views depend? What tables depend on this view? What stages depend on this table? And it just becomes this whole project that takes weeks and weeks to map in Excel spreadsheets and all of that. And I think what you're telling me here is people don't have to do that anymore.
Yep, exactly. So in this case, let's take this example where, hey, in the customer table, we have this nation key, but the finance guy is asking us to add nation name. And where is the nation name? It's in a different table. So I'm going to go to the nation table, and I'm going to add that column to the stage table. So that's the new column that we just added. Now I can call it nation. And I need to specify how the customer and the nation are joined. So I can use this place to join those. And you can see it's a nice autocomplete option here where you're not typing a lot here. Key equals to in nation key. So now I have done that. I have my new column in the stage, but now I need to make sure that I add it to the finance view. What I can do is I go here again and say, show me the impact of this new column that I'm adding. So I do the column level lineage diagram. And again, since we are column aware, we know exactly how these columns are all connected. So you can see, for example, if I click on the address, you can see how the address is connected, where it's coming from, where it's going. It's shared with both finance and marketing. If I click on marketing segment, it's only shared with marketing. I can also hover over on these circles where you have T indicating a transformation. If you remember, we have entered those rules earlier. Now, if I click on the nation, it stops right here because it doesn't go anywhere. We just added the new column. So by looking at this diagram, I also see that it's coming from n_name, which is renamed as a nation here. So you get a clear understanding of what's happening with your change, what's about to happen. Now that you understand it, the part 2 of this work is go in here and say propagate addition. So once I propagate this, I can choose where I want to propagate it to. I can preview the change, make sure that once it wires up, everything looks good. And now I'm happy with it. I'm about to make a lot of changes. So it also is asking you to check into the Git. But once that's done, here we are. We've just done all that work. And if I go in here and say, now that I'm done with all that work, I'm going to just refresh my, so it's going to go ahead and build all these objects, make sure adjust the code, everything is there for you.
That is cool. And does it backfill data if it needs to?
You can add that logic, but by default, it doesn't do it.
All right, it puts the columns. That's cool. This is things that many months ago in my previous life, this would take a long time to do something like this. A lot of headache and error prone. Really cool. Do you surface, and maybe something on the roadmap, do you surface a lot of this as metadata back to, say, data governance tools, if folks have already invested in different tools for a data catalog and lineage glossary, for some of this to be fed back in there, either by APIs being called to get this or somehow?
Yeah, so there are some mechanisms that we are working on today, but yes, the idea is to be able to output this metadata so that we can import that back into some data lineage tool or data cataloging tool. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I think that really just helps with overall the observability story. One piece to here, and maybe you can highlight that, is orchestration. Where would like the Darkstars of the world or the prefects of the world, Airflows, where would those come into for orchestration, or do you have your own native for orchestration?
We don't have a scheduler. We don't orchestrate things, but we do have the API that is, that you can create jobs in here, and you can also check into the Git, the state of the graph. So once you create that job and check this into Git, then now you have a state. You deploy that to another environment like a QA or a prod, and then from an orchestrator, you call that job ID and the environment on which you want to refresh with credential information, and then you're good to go.
Okay, that's really good. So all of this, as you're doing this work, it's checking into Git, so you always have that source control there ready to go. Very cool. One other thing too, again, just looking at the screen. And to be honest, first time I'm looking at the screen here, I haven't seen this before. There is a build and then there is a deploy. Can you talk a little bit about how you maintain the different environments? I'm guessing the experience we've had here is as a developer building this, and there's probably going to be a pipeline to push this to UAT, to stage, to prod. How do you accommodate for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, when you're building this, you're always building in your dev environment. This is by default. You're always in your dev. So you build this graph, I'm ready now, and I can then say, go ahead and put this into Git. That's one step. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about how the environments are set up and show you that. So if I go to settings here, I have these two sections. One is called storage locations, and the other is called environments. Under the environments, you can see there's dev, there's QA, I can add prod, UAT, whatever I want. The storage locations are just abstracted kind of labels that point to a database in the schema. So for instance, SRC in dev could be pointing to database A, schema A. But whereas the same SRC in QA could be pointing to database B and schema. So basically, these are defined once, and per environment, you go ahead and create the mapping, how they're mapped. So if you open up one of these environments, what you have in an environment is the account information, Snowflake account information, the credentials, and the mechanism to, you can use username password, or you can do OAuth, whatever that method you want to use. And the third thing you have here is the storage mappings. This is what I was talking earlier. How do you want to map that SRC to in your Snowflake database schema, so that when I create an object, when I hit that create button, if it is mapped to SRC, then it would be created on the database in this schema. So that's how that is.
Yeah, and this is interesting because I think you can look at it from a logical point of view like SRC, or you can even go functionally for functional teams. The sales team could have their own database and schema, and now they're instantiating data that way, or marketing could have theirs. And yeah, okay.
Right. And the permissions could be controlled on that database so that nobody's able to access that data other than who you intend to access.
Just help me understand again the difference, maybe I'm missing this, between an environment and a storage location.
Yeah. So definitely. So storage location is just basically saying, hey, some labels that you provide. So in this case, I've created SRC, DW, demo, and so on. So that's just like labels that you create. The main idea here is environments. In the environments we map these to those. But what happens in here is, if you look at these objects and in the config, you will see the location. It is mapped to those storage locations.
The logical locations.
The logical location. And that's what determines where this gets created when I push that create button or when I run it. It generates the code because it understands the EDW is in dev, it's EDW is database A schema, so it's going to use that. If it's running the same thing in QA, it's going to look at still EDW, but EDW is going to be mapped to something else in QA. It's going to be, so that's how all of those are linked.
Got it.
Yeah. So once you create those environments, now it's just a matter of deploying these. So I can go into, take this graph, I can go check that into where you create branches, you can do commits here and so on. Every node that you picked up there becomes a YAML file. So it's all YAML at the end of the day that you're checking in. And once you check in, it'll put in a commit. I can go to the deploy and I can say, hey, deploy that to QA, for instance. I just go deploy, and it will go to the Git repository that you have configured, and you pick the commit that you want to push to, and then go through that deployment. You'll have a chance to review the plan. It'll tell you what you're about to change, compare the changes, and once you approve it, it'll go ahead and deploy all those changes for you. That's pretty much how it works. And you can also do all of that with the command line, so that programmatically with the dev pipelines, you can integrate.
Okay, you have APIs for doing that programmatically. And I think just something just popped up as you were talking there. Can you auto this DAX? Because essentially this is a directed acyclic graph, right? That's what we see here. Can you auto that YAML file outside if somebody really wanted to be ambitious and create that YAML and then just import it in here?
Yes,
the UI?
yeah. Absolutely, as long as they stick to our format. Yeah, and there are companies that are doing that right now as we speak.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some people who are trying to do that. So they want to import something that they have into Coalesce, and they're saying, hey, what's your YAML format? We'll generate it and then push it to this, and then boom, you have the graph in Coalesce.
Okay, there are a couple of questions here that I kind of want to touch while we have this on the screen. So just bear with me. First one is this concept of the node. I think it's an interesting concept the team is going with and making that very extensible. Do you see a marketplace for nodes where if my team has done all the work and we figure out how to create this amazing node that is transforming data in a way that we really love, why keep it within the four walls of my organization? Maybe I can put it out there, monetize it, and get value if people try to use it. Is that kind of the direction you're going, or maybe that's way out there?
No, that's exactly where we're going. We want to create this shareable area, like a marketplace, where our customers can exchange these, or a third party can develop these nodes. But that's exactly where we're going, and that's our vision.
Awesome. And then from an enterprise perspective, I'm guessing you have enterprises that would require kind of enterprise grade ready with federated security and all of that. Are those things that you have today or are built into the platform? Because I'm guessing you still basically, you're essentially coming to market here with this.
Yeah, so we have, as far as authenticating with Snowflake, we have all types of authentication mechanisms that that Snowflake supports. We support like Okta integration, single sign-on with that, OAuth authentication. We have all types of mechanisms there to authenticate with Snowflake. The other thing is, from a security standpoint, our security firms, when they look at us, they like the fact that we don't move the data out of Snowflake. So the data is sitting in Snowflake. This is actually leveraging Snowflake to do the transformations. So all the data that is in Snowflake will move within Snowflake to a different table or a different view or whatever. It's all happening there. So we don't pull that out, and we don't store any credential of the users. So those are the main things there. People like security teams, when they look at us, yeah, this is low risk. We have some large firms that we have cleared security and no issues there.
Awesome. And then I think the last piece here, and maybe you can help me understand this, would be, I'm guessing this is not charity. You are a business, and there is a business strategy around this. How do you monetize this? What is the pricing or the go-to-market? How do you do that?
Yeah, so our pricing today is completely based on user licenses. So the way that we see is, hey, as an organization, if you're planning to hire 4 engineers, and if you get Coalesce, maybe you need only 2 engineers or maybe only 3 engineers. So you're going to save that money. So that's why we think we justify based on pricing it based on the user licenses. That's how it works today. It could be consumption pricing and all of that down the road. But for now, that's how it's priced. And as far as the free versions go, anybody could try the tool as long as they're below 50 nodes. So they get a free version if they keep these number of nodes under 50. Once they go over 50, then we'll talk commercials at that point.
Okay, so you have the freemium model
Yeah.
for try, and it has full functionality. This is not, some of it is not kept behind the paywall. Okay, that's really cool. I think that's really a good segue into how do people try this? I typically bring that up. How do people try this? If they want to get in touch, I'm sure we can leave links in the description. But how would you recommend for folks that are interested in learning more, trying this? Plus, can you also talk about the community? What I've seen having these conversations is folks are looking to build Slack channels and Discord channels, and they try to drive traffic there to build a community. So anything you can talk about from that perspective or a shout out to that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So our community is growing as well. Now, we don't have a big Slack channel yet, but that might happen. And as far as getting access to the tool, today the best way is just go on our website and sign up for a request, like a demo request, and you will get access and somebody would reach out. I know some people say, I don't want to be, like, nobody should reach out to me. I just we'll get there, but right now it's we promise that we don't bother you. We just want to make sure that you can you're helped, and you can, any question that you might have, we answer. So go to the website, sign up for a request for a demo, and then you will get access, and then you can have it under, as long as you keep it under 50 nodes, you can have it forever.
All right. And Satish, I will be remiss if I don't ask this last question because it tricked me a little bit. And I'm guessing there are folks out there who will be saying, through, you got to ask this question. Because when I saw Coalesce, and for the very first time, it came across my radar, I put it into Google to do a search. And I thought it was an event that was held by DBT. And so that kind of tripped me off a little bit there for a second or so until I figure out my way around. And maybe you don't want to talk about it. Can you talk about the name itself and what you're playing on with that name?
Yeah, so it's a very common term that's people in the SQL data space that know about. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, so I definitely know this term way long time ago. And we came up with the name ourselves. We didn't know anything about anybody using that. So I think that's all I can say at this point.
All right, I think that's pretty fair. All right, this was very exciting, Satish. Thank you so much for taking the time and going through this. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I think this whole space of transformation, data engineering, there's a lot of talk that this is 80% or 90% of the effort, especially when people think about machine learning and AI and reporting. Those are the shiny objects. But this foundation of how you transform data and how you put in the infrastructure in place to allow for rapid development, rapid prototyping for innovation, I think it's a huge space, and having tools and automation in place to do that, it's always very exciting, at least to me, and hopefully to the audience and to the decision makers that are watching us today and listening to. Any last words, take away for the audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, first of all, I completely agree with what you just said, and that would have been a good statement for me to also remind people of, because a lot of people fall in that trap where all these other shiny objects, which you mentioned, people think that is the cool thing, that's the focus, but they're missing the point. Yeah, there's I know it's maybe boring and maybe cumbersome work, but I would say get the foundation right. If you get your foundation, everything falls in place. A lot of people don't do data modeling, for example. Nobody does data modeling. Nobody knows what data modeling is anymore. Who's starting? And in some cases, maybe you don't, but you have to have the foundation. Do you build a big house without actually drawing something?
Nah, you don't do that.
Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Yeah, you might build a shack. If you're building a big project, you got to have some plan. And one of those things is data model is one example. But my message is, I would say, focus on the foundation so you don't have to spend a lot of time down the road. Slow down to speed up. Yeah.
There you go. Awesome. Yeah. I think that's a better way to sum this up, Satish. Yeah. Slow down to speed up. So thank you everyone for watching. We're going to leave a link into all of this to Coalesce in the description below and other resources to check out the product. It's a fascinating product in the modern data space. Thank you all. And we'll see you in the next demo and presentation we do. Thanks, Satish.
All right.